Massive inflation is headed our way, even more than we've seen. No, there's no. Hold on a second. Let's talk about this because it's so. Oh my goodness, it's so funny. It really is. How dare you? How dare you? By the way, my Tim Pool hat because I'm going bald. I think I'm going bald. Who did that song? Put in the show notes who did that song. I think I'm going bald. Well, Papa doesn't want to come visit, okay? Because his brother just came down. All right, so here's the assets, total assets from the Federal Reserve. And we go back to 2002, I believe, 2003. We can see that less than $1 trillion of assets. Assets are just bonds. I'll show you how this works here in just a second. Then a little click right here, blip, where they jumped up a little bit. And then there's massive jump right here. Even though they're selling bonds right now, it's not nearly what we're still well above where we were during the pandemic. You see what I'm saying? So obviously, massive inflation is coming. And then we're going to look at M2 as well, and look this massive jump in M2, this money supply. All right. So let me show you what happens here. What happens when the Federal Reserve buys bonds? It increases the money supply in the economy. When the Fed buys bonds, it increases the money supply by swapping out bonds in exchange for cash to the general public. So what the Fed is literally doing is they're buying bonds. They're buying bonds from banks. They're buying bonds. They're giving the money to the banks to theoretically lend out. All right, that's the whole gist behind the money supply increasing. Benny, what are you doing over there? So right here. The Fed buys bonds and increases the money supply in the economy by swapping out bonds in exchange for cash to the general public. This puts more money in the economy and helps lower interest rates, encouraging more spending and borrowing by America. Americans also lowers the yields attached to the bonds, as bond buying encourages banks to lend more as the cash reserves go up. All right, so with the Fed's buying bonds, they're putting money into the economy. They're saying, give me bonds that don't really exist until they just create them out of nowhere. Give me the bonds, and here's the cash that doesn't exist. It just is created out of nowhere. All right. This is fiat, literally fiat currency. It's just they speak it into existence. All right, and so we can see here when they do that, when they buy bonds, right here, the money supply jumps up, and we can see the money supply jumps up. Now, of course, the problem with this is if we look at it from everyone would agree there's basically minimal inflation from here to there, right? Yes, we would. I mean, because not to agree with that would be silly. Let's take a look. So here's the CPI, and I've mentioned a million times how silly the CPI is, but we'll go with it. And the reason I say it's silly because it uses OER, owner's equivalent rent, and again, that's 45% of CPI, and then you got transportation costs, which are about 15% of CPI. It's silly. I mean, if we want to look at a true inflation rate, we actually have to look at a basket of goods that you purchase on a relative basis. But that's not what inflation is based on. So we're going to run with it. Anyway, so here's the CPI, and you can see. Remember, CPI. This is also when the price of real estate was going through the roof back then. Remember that when everybody and their mom were leveraging to buy houses because the real estate market just went up. All right. So I just want to point out here's CPI. 1 point, the year over year. 1 point, you can see, got to 4 right there in 2008 when the price of real estate was going through the roof, and then it crashed. Then it went back to 2 or 3, I should say, from 2011 till when did it ever break 3% again? Not until 2021, basically 21. What? From 2011 to 2021, the CPI didn't go above 3% and barely just went above 2%, even though right here the assets were increasing like crazy. The money supply was increasing like crazy. I mean, here we go. Look at that money supply. Zoops. And yet it didn't do anything. That's kind of weird. That's like almost like the money supply didn't lead to high inflation. Kind of strange. But then again, this is just a blip, right? I mean, that's just a blip compared to this. Look at this, dude. That is just a blip compared to that. So Josh, what do you expect? And here's M2. That's, this is nothing. It's just a gradual M2. And then look at that massive M2. M2 is the actual money supply. All right, so let's look at it as a format because we always at a log. So we always want to look at a log. Log is a percentage increase from the previous period. That's all that matters. The actual dollars don't matter. It's a percentage increase that matters because the dollars, well, I don't even know how you explain it, but I explain in my book. But I mean, if you already, let me just show what I'm talking about. So let's go to format here. I'm going to go to format. And we're going to go to log, boink. All right, so now you can see this increase in total assets from the Fed was higher than this increase in total assets from the Fed. We went from we were at 700 billion to freaking 2.5 billion. That's a 300% increase. Here we went from, what is that? We'll say right there. 700 billion to 2.5 trillion, excuse me, a 4.5, that's over a 300% increase. And literally, I mean, look at that. In a year, here we went from, we'll just go right here, 4 trillion to 7 trillion. And then you can go to 4 trillion to right here. And that's over to what's that, 9 trillion. That is about the equivalent of an increase as we had right there. But then we start dropping. We never dropped here, a little bit here, but certainly never dropped like we're doing here. No. All right, so the point being is there's a massive increase in assets right here. Massive. And no inflation to go with it. None. Have a big increase in assets, not even nearly to the extent that this was. And we had high inflation to go with it. So that means we're 1 for 2. All right, then on top of that, we have this massive decline in M2, and they're not nearly as massive as the decline in M2 there. No, Finnegan, no. So I want to show you, here's the monetary supply, M2. This is what matters. And we're going to go to format. We're going to log it again. And we're going to see here, wow, that looks pretty stable, doesn't it? It's just going up from Finnegan. So here's the M2. You see that's a blip. I mean, it's a jump, but it's not nearly to the extent of what it looks like if you don't log it. All right, so again, go look at that. It's a huge jump, but when you log it, it's a percentage increase in total instead of total dollar increases. And this is why it makes it important. If I have look, what do you want more in your retirement accounts? Let's say I have $100,000 and it increases 10%. That's you made $10,000. All right. So if you have $100,000 starting with and increase 10%, you made $10,000. Right. So that's what matters. The percentage. If you have $200,000 and an increase by 5%, you've also made $10,000. Which is better? Well, inherently, the $100,000 because it went up 10%. But at the end of the day, they're still both $10,000. But one's $10,000 up from a higher base. The other's $10,000 up from a lower base. The one that's up from a lower base is better. That's just a fact. So while they both went up $10,000, if you actually log it, inherently the one that went up from 100 to 110 is a higher. What are you doing, buddy? It looks more prominent because it is. It went up from a lower base. It went up 10% from a lower base, not in dollars, but in percentage. What do you want more? You want it to be percentage-wise, not the dollar amount, the percentage-wise. So let's keep going here. All right. So you can see that. I can't stress this enough. And people they don't get it. It's weird to me. All right, so now we're going to see this M2 money supply. Now let's look at something else. The velocity of money, you can see from 1995, it just has gone down dramatically. Look at that. We had a bump right here. We had massive flow. So you had this massive fall during the pandemic. Then you had a big jump to back to even. But if we look at a linear, can I do trend lines here? I don't think I can actually. Too bad. The trend line is like just straight like that, and we're right where we should be. Go up, right back to where we were. That's a trend line. Massive. Just how much a dollar changes hands. I buy something. I buy this book, Paradox of Debt, which you should buy. Then the guy who sold me the book buys something else. That's not what's happening here. The velocity is falling off a cliff. And this is, continuance going on. We're almost going on 30 years now. So what's causing that? There's a myriad number of ways to guess what's causing it. All right, so last thing I want to show you here, check this out. I think we can agree there's certainly no proof that increase in monetary supply, M2, increase in assets lead to inflation. There's just no proof that. We're batting 1 for 2. One time it did, one time it didn't. That's just not enough statistical probability to make any kind of claim that will happen. We actually have enough other countries we can look at to show it doesn't. It doesn't. The increase in monetary supply, M2, and the increase in assets do not lead to inflation. We just know that. I mean, it could, but inherently it's not a one for one. If X, then Y. It's just not like that at all. In fact, if anything, it's almost the opposite in some regard. And it's just velocity of money. I'm just telling you right now. Velocity of money is dropping. Thus, people aren't, you don't want to say they're hoarding, but they're just not spending. They're just not. All right, but then we got a point two of this, and this is the other op thing here. I'm going to share with you what my man, this is a great book. I highly recommend it. I'll put in the link in the show notes. And if you buy it, I get that sweet, sweet commission from Amazon, all of 2% or 1%. I don't even know what it is. So I want to share with you what Richard says here. And this is, I mean, again, I think we just proven that high asset levels, high M2 do not inherently cause inflation. We just proved that. There's no other. When I say inflation, the Fed always wants a strategic devalue of the currency. Why? Because hoarding, i.e. not spending money, is the purest thing for deflation. Not spending money keeps money from being changed time and time again, and it basically reduces the money supply. They don't want that. So they want you to be incentivized to spend, and they do that by a steady devaluing of the currency. If you hold the value of the dollar, it will be worth less a year from now, and 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Thus, we want you to spend it. And you think that increases velocity, and yet it has not done because inflation is so low. You want to increase velocity, increase inflation. That's what you do, but it's not happening because people just aren't spending. I don't know why. I mean, I don't spend very much. I look at my shirt from 2011. You know what I'm saying? It's just I've had this Bruins hat since, I don't know, freaking 10 years now. Finnegan? No. All right, so I'll read you this from Richard Vague here. Check this out. All right, as part of the Fed's overall policy of increasing interest rates, it has indicated plans to shrink the U.S. balance sheet from $9 trillion in 2021 to a pre-pandemic $4 trillion. All right, so that's what Richard's saying. And you can see that's happening here. If we go to the Fed balance sheet, let's just go here. Let's go to 2000 and right there, boink. We'll just say January 1st, right there. So you can see the Fed was up to 9 trillion, and they're trying to drop it. Now they're below 7 trillion. All right, they're below 8 trillion. Excuse me. So they have begun to reduce it. Significant. That's a pretty significant drop from 9 to 7.75 trillion. Now, that's a big deal. That's about 15% decline in the balance sheet. But here's where Richard, I don't want to say got it wrong, but it's interesting because what Richard says, the very next sentence. But this action will exert downward pressure on stock markets and other asset values and is not strictly necessary. So here we are at the end of 2023, and the Fed is reducing. It's not like they. All right, hold on a second. So Richard's claim is by the Fed reducing its balance sheet, and you can see the M2 as well being reduced, then the asset prices of real estate, the asset prices of stocks and bonds should go down. And that happened in 2022 for stocks and bonds, but it didn't happen in real estate. And we go here, let's go to 2022 or 2023, excuse me. And we're going to show you that the Fed's still reducing. I mean, look at this. Fed's going down from 8.7 million all the way down to 7.7 million. I mean, that's a significant decline. It's 12.5% roughly decline in the assets that they have. And then you look at M2 here as well. We'll go to 2023, 23 right there, January till today. And look at that, a significant drop in M2 as well. And yet, that's not what happened. 2023, you've had a significant run-up in stocks and bonds and real estate. And we'll check this out. All right, so watch this. Year-to-date, VTI is up 24%. Year-to-date, crazy. We go to the total bond index. Total bond index year-to-date, it's up 5%. And the bulk of that is this last right here. It's crazy. I mean, because since the interest rates dropped, the bonds have gone up way higher. Anyway, so we'll check this out. So it hasn't happened. I think I'm saying check this out. Every time I say check this out, I got to pause because one of my dogs is being antsy over there. He's got ants in his pants. So we haven't seen a downward pressure on stock markets and other asset values. just haven't seen it. And we certainly haven't seen a downward pressure on real estate prices. Just haven't seen, I mean, a little bit, but not very much. Not to the extent that it'd make up the massive jumps that we've had over the last couple of years. Just not. It's actually pretty interesting because he talks about in this book that when let me see if I can't find ways. Open market operations, which is what we're talking about here, the Federal Reserve getting involved in buying bonds and whatnot. Well, and again, when they're buying bonds, they're increasing the monetary supply. They're putting cash into the economy. Well, open market operations do not lead to price inflation, which we've proven for sure. They appear to play a role in asset inflation, increasing the prices of stocks and real estate, or at least arresting any decline in their value. All right, but that's not. So we can make an argument: open market operations have led to an increase in asset values, real estate, and stocks, and well, bonds haven't really done anything, but certainly stocks. Since we've been doing this, but then when they decline in terms of reducing the monetary supply, reducing their assets by buying back their bonds, there hasn't been a corresponding decline in real estate and stocks. There just hasn't been. I mean, again, you can say 2022, but it's not like they stopped the selling of their bonds and the reducing the monetary supply in 2023. They just haven't, man. Both M2 and the assets have dropped significantly in 2022. So it's very interesting. What does that mean? I think at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is population and velocity of money, is how much people are willing to, again, I don't want to use the word hoard, but are you actually spending your money? Are you consuming it? And if the velocity of money is dropping like a brick in water, then you're not. You're holding on to it. And one of the reasons I think you're holding on to it and you're not spending it is because you're paying down debt. And that's the issue. I'm telling you, debt is deflationary. It's just that simple. When you are paying back loans, you're not consuming the loans. You're basically borrowing is consuming today, but paying it back in the future. At some point, the future has got to be paid. And it's when the future doesn't get its consumption, you're going to have a declining in velocity of money. And when you have a decline in velocity of money and a shrinking of the population, which you are across the world, it's just a fact. I mean, you can say it's not shrinking, it's growing older. And we know for a fact older people don't consume as much. They just don't. Anyway, so the idea that massive inflation, I get so many people that just worry sick about massive inflation. And I say, where's the evidence? And they'll say, oh, grocery store. I say, yeah, it's temporary, I grant you. There's always going to be inflation. That's the whole point of the Fed. If we didn't have any inflation, man, there'd be freaking, I mean, if we didn't have any decline, the devaluing of the currency, people would be holding on to their money like you would believe. There would be no velocity in money hardly. Why? Because a dollar is worth the same tomorrow as it is today. And then technology can increase the ability to buy more goods for the same dollar. That's deflation. And you're going to hold on to it because you're like, my dollar, it basically grows in value relative to what it was a year ago, where now the dollar declines in value relative to what it was years ago because of a small, steady inflation, which is frankly what you want. That's the best system there is, man. The gold standard won't do that. You got to have debt to have growth. This is just a fact, dude. But you also have to pay that debt off, which means you're going to have a certain amount of inflation to fight the deflation inherently by have to pay back debt. I don't know why people get so worried on this. They're like, I can't retire because inflation is going to eat me alive. I'm like, dude, I mean, it could. No, that's the issue. No one knows, man. That's what's crazy. No one knows. And we just look at Japan. Oh, Japan's a different economy. They're enclosed. It's just they have a different work ethic. No, they're people, dude. I hate when I hear that. Japan is not like us. They don't have the immigration. They're more of they have a better saving. No, they just no. They're people. The same thing. Their debt to GDP is through the roof. They're doing what we are doing. They did what we are 20 years ago, what we are going into now, which is a balance sheet deleveraging. People just don't want to take as much debt. If they don't want to take as much debt, you're just not going to have the same growth. You're just not. And that's just a fact. And if you don't have the same growth, you're not going to have the same inflation. It's just not going to happen. If people don't want to spend their money, they're not going to have the same inflation. It's just that simple. And no matter what the interest rates are, you're not going to encourage people to spend more, spend more. People are like, nah, I did that. I'm never going through that again. That's what I'm saying. After 2008, never going through that again. I don't care what the interest rates are. All right, so I'll put a link to the show notes for this book. It's a wonderful book. I'm not done with it yet. I'm on page 168. Actually, he's got a bunch of charts on here, which I haven't really dived through too much yet. Where is it here? Where's his chart? Right here. Paradox of Debt charts. Paradoxofdebt.com charts. Yeah, it's just as fantastic. I love this stuff. But I mean, again, who knows, man? Could he be right? And lots of good stuff here. So love your thoughts. Put the comments in the show notes, and we'll see you.